The FBI investigates hillbilly killer Kinnie Wagner. It was a cold, frosty morning, an ideal day for Christmas Eve. Kinnie Wagner watched the coffee boiling in the tin pot on the little pot-bellied stove and whistled tunelessly. Snow had fallen during the night, covering the ground with a luxurious ermine blanket, and the early morning stillness was pregnant with an air of hushed expectancy. Attempted arrest ends in murder. Kinnie glanced idly out the frosted window. As his eyes wandered across the yard and up the trail, he suddenly started. 4 men were approaching on horseback. Quickly he strode across the rough-hewn floor to the door and pulled it open. He watched apprehensively as Sheriff Turner and his 3 deputies dismounted from their horses. "What do you want?" Kinnie shouted, and his hand stole to his revolver at his side. "We want you, Wagner, for suspicion of robbery and jailbreaking," Deputy Freeman shouted back. Kinnie felt himself seized by an overwhelming impulse to run, to break for the open. His horse was across the yard and down the way a spell, and with a bit of luck he might make it. Taking his chances, Kinnie bolted from the cabin. His feet, encased in knee-high boots, stumbled clumsily on the frozen snow. Deputy McIntosh opened fire with a shotgun. There was a sharp report, and the ensuing load hit Kinnie along the belt line, numbing a part of his body and glancing off into the side of the cabin. Kinnie pulled out his revolver, but the shots from the deputy's gun had rendered it useless. He turned in his tracks and dashed wildly back into the cabin, his progress accompanied by the clipped shots from McIntosh. Slamming the front door, Kinnie threw the bolt. As he leaned panting against the heavy door, he heard them running towards the cabin, shouting, "Give up, Wagner! We've got you cornered!" His eyes flitted anxiously around the room and fell on his shotgun. Seizing the weapon, he raised it to his shoulder, took careful aim through the window, and fired both barrels point-blank at McIntosh. The shots found their mark, for the man screamed in anguish as he slumped slowly to the ground. Kinnie waited momentarily to see if he would rise again, his gun ready, but the figure lay motionless. The sheriff and the others were running over to their fallen comrade. They turned McIntosh over on his back, and Kinnie saw the snow stained crimson. He backed away from the window as the gun slipped from his trembling hands. The 3 men had straightened up from their inspection of McIntosh, and with raised guns and grim faces they closed in on the cabin. Almost stumbling in his haste, Kinnie wrenched open the rear door to the cabin. As he slipped out into the open, he heard them breaking in the front window, and he hastened his steps. But they were close behind him, and shots were peppering at his heels as he made for the first clump of scrub pines. Suddenly he felt a heavy blow on his back and then sharp, swift pain. He doubled over and then, desperately clinging to consciousness, dragged his feet over that last stretch. Finally, he reached the little bay mare. She was saddled and waiting. Painfully, he pulled himself up onto the mare's broad back. "Go, Nellie," he whispered through pain-clenched teeth as he pulled in the reins and feebly clicked his spurs. "I've just killed a man." Kinnie Wagner escaped from the authorities that Christmas Eve of 1924 with a back full of buckshot and the brand of killer freshly engraved on his soul. The taste of drawn blood was new and strange to him, for this was his first murder. He fled to the Appalachians, which he called his home, to Clinch Mountain, his front porch. He knew every rock and crag in that section of Virginia, having been born there 20 years ago.